Live.
Perfect. Hello, everyone. We're going to call the special board meeting to order for Wednesday, July 15th. Do we have any declarations of interest from anyone this evening? Seeing none, we'll move forward to the report from the Committee of Whole in Camera. I'll turn that over to Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you, Chair Brainy. The board approved the actions of the Committee of the Whole in Camera and discussed appointments, personnel issues, and employee relations issues. That is my report.
Thank you. We have someone, you move that and somebody just to second that report. Let's have Trustee Barrett. Can you second that? Perfect. All in favor? We'll then move on to a recommended action. So I'll now call on Chair of Education Finance, Darlene Forbes.
Thank you, Chair Brainy. So we, the Education Finance Committee met last week, and we had a public deputation from the Special Education Advisory Committee. We had recommended passing the budget to the board. I just wanted to make note that there were several changes noted by trustees, specifically Trustee Edwards, about the current draft document budget booklet. And I would just like to confirm that staff has received these items and that trustees will have a chance to see the revised final draft document before it's posted. I don't know, go ahead. Oh, sorry, I'm not chairing this.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the staff have received, these are notes concerning it's the text of the document, certain emphasis being suggested, footnotes being added, and a correction made around to really reflect the latest news of the funds that were provided under the student support, the new student support funding that was initially being withheld by the province until central agreements were until local agreements were in place. But we have since learned that has now been lifted. So those funds will flow, and those adjustments will be made to our final document. But in terms of the figures, the actual numbers, which is before the board tonight, representing a balanced budget, the numbers, none of the numbers in the document change.
Thank you, Interim Associate Director Kisco. So based on that information, I would like to make a motion based on the actions of the Education Committee met last week, that I would like to motion that it is recommended that for the board, it is recommended that the 2020-2021 draft budget containing total revenues of $923,634,334 and total expenses of $923,634,334 be approved as presented.
Thank you, Education Finance Chair Forbes. Could I have somebody second that? It's Trustee Lundquist. Second that. Let's see here. Do we have a seconder?
Trustee Barnes has her hand up, Chris.
Trustee Barnes, thank you. Trustee Barrett. If people could do me a favor and hit that, that'd make my life a lot easier if people can do that, because I can't see all the faces on the screen, but thank you for letting me know. So Trustee Barnes, you're seconding that? Any questions or comments? Trustee Barrett, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair Brainy. I just want to take my hand down because I know that is a bit of a problem. Okay, first of all, I know that that Chair Finance Forbes will echo the same comments with regards to the amount of effort and work that's gone into being able to do this. So certainly, you know, I recognize the amount of work and effort, the late GSNs, all those elements that put together. I will not, however, oppose the budget, but there is part of me that would really like to vote no against this budget. Not because of any of the work that the staff has done or the work that the trustees have done, but there's part of me that would really like to say no, to be able to send a message to the provincial government about, from the position that they have put us into, the lack of foresight and the lack of planning with regards to what are the potentials for September for COVID. None of the options that are being presented by the government, which range from full day school to no school, like in the sense of online learning, not one of the scenarios has the the Ministry of Education truly funded in any regards. Because of the foresight of the Durham board on being able to roll out Chromebooks, we are in a much better position than most boards to be able to extend learning to our students. That was from the foresight of being able to go forward with that. In no way was that really supported financially by the provincial government. We also have a government that has suggested, and I heard this today, and that's why I'm a little ticked and angered, is that they believe there is so much surplus within the budgets and the GSNs that the cost, or the concept of cost, of being able to protect our students and staff from the potential of what may exist for COVID, that there's plenty of surplus and wiggle room within the GSNs. Well, I don't know what a wiggle looks like to the Minister of Education. I don't know if he understands what a budget looks like for a school board. However, there is no wiggle room when we are not necessarily fulfilling the needs and the mandates for our children and for our students. We have a primary directive in order to be able to make sure we educate our children, but our second directive is to make sure that we keep both our staff and our students safe. And there is no recognition by the ministry that this is going to potentially cost millions of dollars, whether it's a classroom of 15, whether it's personal protective equipment, or whether it's technology. There is no recognition. We have done, through staff, and when I say we, it's the royal we, it's not me, but the staff has done a Herculean task on being able to balance out what the GSNs are and deliver this budget. I will not oppose the budget, but I will oppose the ministry's actions on assuming that somehow boards across this province of Ontario have the ability and the funds in order to be able to meet the requirements that are being put on this board. So I applaud the efforts. I will vote in favor of this budget. However, it does not truly represent the best effort of this province in order to be able to ensure that our students and our staff are safe, nor does it recognize that that the dollars in order to be able to do that are not being reflected in the GSNs or reflected in reality of what we are facing. As a business leader, I know what it's costing. I've said this a few times now. I know I sound like a broken record, but the concept of being able to keep safe 7,000 staff and 71,000 students in our school board alone, it's shameful that we are ignoring the issue. So I will support the budget. Trustee Forbes, thank you for your leadership, the Herculean task of staff, but it's shameful. And I just wanted to be able to say that because every board passing budgets across the province would somehow give the minister perhaps a belief that everything's all well, but this is the land of Oz, and no heart, no brains, and no courage to be able to deal with the real issues that are facing us in the school system. So I'll give up the soap now, and I'll turn it back to you, Chair Brady.
Thank you, Trustee Barrett. I'll go to Trustee Edwards, Lundquist, then Morton.
Hopefully, can you hear me? Thank you, Chair Brady. I agree with Trustee Barrett on a lot of his comments, and I do too want to thank the staff and Finance Chair Forbes for putting this budget together. I have heard similar comments around the wiggle room. And it concerns me, especially just in one area is around transportation, is that in their back to school guide for boards, in appendix, I think 1 or 2, it mentions following the guidelines for Transport Canada around safety on the bus during COVID-19. And you have to click on that link to then get all the requirements. And in there, it clearly talks about procedures around before, during, and after the bus, drivers wearing PPE, the cleaning, etc. And so, and I've heard comments that boards have wiggle room, especially in transportation. Considering they have clawed back $563,000 from our fuel charges, and thanks to staff, they have basically returned that money, but actually kept it in holding as well. So we really paid it out of this year's budget, but kept it in holding to cover costs for PPE. But I do not think that that's going to be enough. And that's just one example. I also have concerns that, again, they think that we have this wiggle room, yet we continually to overspend in the area of special education, and this area has not been addressed still and continues to be an issue. And again, thanks to our staff, we do support special education to the tune of another $4.6 million. So for this, I will support the budget, but I would like to add to the motion, and this is that the Board of Trustees send a letter along with the submission of the budget to the Minister of Education, identifying the risks and issues around COVID-19, etc. That are cost pressures with the DDSB. And that's the reason why, and I really would like to have in it things like commitment for the ministry to fund COVID-19 expenses, the no commitment in particular, the unknown and therefore unaccountable for this in the budget, although they've announced funding for mental health for $10 million and 15, we have not been allocated that funding. The continued use of 2006 census data and parts of the funding for spec ed, safe schools, and the demographic allocation, 14-year-old data that does not reflect the diversity and social economics of Durham anymore. Our continued need to overspend the special education envelope, our ever increasing and underfunded WSIB, restrictions under the EDC regulation to address increasing costs of land purchases, underfunded technology and technology supports, and any costs associated with implementing the Transport Canada guidelines, what they're recommending for boards for COVID-19 and any other potential risks. Anyways, that's not in the whole motion, but my motion is to send a letter from the Board of Trustees with the budget to the Minister of Education, outlining our concerns, risks, cost pressures for the DDSB.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Edwards. I think what we'll do is we'll take that as a separate motion after we approve the budget, that we can move forward with something like that. Trustee Lundquist, then Trustee Morton.
Thank you. I find myself in a bit of a surprising position because in the last Education Finance meeting, I was the one that brought a motion to recommend approval of the budget to the board, and I'm not voting in favor of the budget. And I gave it much thought, and And it's not because I don't appreciate the tremendous work that has been done, because I genuinely do. But I've watched the government over the last few days, and my concerns have not been alleviated. They've actually increased. And so in my view, I don't feel responsible in passing a budget in the midst of this kind of speculative world. So I just think it's really an extraordinary thing to be asked to pass a budget when there are so many unknowns. We're entering into a phase of massive unknowns, and I get that, you know, all indicators are that boards just don't have enough space, enough staff, the resources to manage these things, to educate kids in this climate, to keep our teachers, our education workers safe. I'm struggling a great deal. So I've watched education very closely and watched the minister's announcements very closely. And I would say that in the best of times, there's a tremendous disconnect sometimes between the Ministry of Education and what is happening. And Donna has actually appropriately kind of named some of that: the old data, the disconnect between need and formulas for funding and whatnot. And I don't think that's unique to this government. I think it's been existing for a long time in light of the fact that it's a 14-year gap. But I think for me, I just look at how are we going to be sure that our students are safe and educated in this environment if the ministry isn't going to provide what is required to provide. And in my view, this budget isn't going to do that. And so I can't vote in favor of it. There are just too many unknowns. I appreciate the letter. And in fact, we did talk about a letter the last time in Education Finance about the importance of sending a letter asking for greater attention to these things that are not going to be funded by this budget. But in light of the indications from the ministry this week, I have to just say that it's not something I can support, because I don't think that funding will be coming, and we're going to be asked to find it. And I don't know where we're going to find it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Morton, Noble, and Crawford.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brainy, I just want to say that I fully support everything that Trustee Donna Edwards has said. We need to communicate with the ministry. I also support everything that Trustee Michael Barrett has said, because I will be supporting this budget. However, it is with much skepticism and hesitancy. I am concerned about so many things because we require a level of flexibility. There are so many unknowns presently, whether it's class size, whether it's level of classroom supports, social work supports, transportation, PPE equipment. There are so many needs that we will be experiencing in September and October. So I will be looking for a great deal of flexibility, and hopefully the ministry will be able to help us with that. So as I said, support the budget, and I'm thankful, but I'm very uneasy about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Morton, Trustee Noble, and Trustee Crawford.
Thank you, Chair Brainy. I am deeply grateful for the work the staff has been doing on the budget, and I know that it's not an easy year to budget with a global pandemic. I have a lot of concerns about the ministry and the lack of funding that's being provided to all school boards, and it's not just ours, but I do think that the funding, much like Trustee Ludwig said, is not going to come, and that's why I have deep difficulty voting in favor of budget when we know there's no room for trial and error on this. There's no room for trial and error when it comes to people's lives and students' lives and staff's lives. This is a pandemic. We can't take the risk of sending people back into buildings unprepared. And when the government is not giving us proper direction or committed to proper funding, it makes me deeply concerned. We've seen what's happening across other countries and how numbers are continuing to spike when regulations are not kept. And while things reopen, cases begin to spike again. And it's a deep concern of mine that if we're not going to get adequate funding to take care of that we're going to end up in a bad situation again. I'm very concerned about that. Durham is still in stage 2. we're still in phase 2, which I believe one of the recommendations is that social gatherings should be no more than 10 people. And when the recommendation for class sizes is 15, I have more concerns around that as well. With all this being said, as much as I appreciate the work staff has been doing, I cannot support a budget where there's so much uncertainty in what's going to happen, knowing what our situation is now, and knowing that I don't believe the government is not going to provide the funding that we need to actually properly move into the school year.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Noble. Trustee Crawford?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say a lot of work has gone into this, and I'm going to vote in favor of passing a balanced budget. There's nothing wrong with sending letters to the government. There's nothing wrong with arguing with the government and making suggestions on an ongoing basis. It's something that we and staff should be doing. But keeping that in mind, I'd like to ask the question, what are the repercussions for not passing the budget?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's a requirement that school boards do pass a budget, a balanced budget. Again, if I don't know if anyone's attempted not passing a budget, the ministry would probably decide it's appropriate to step in at that point. Can I also suggest that some of the uncertainty is definitely there, but it's there regardless. I mean, we are working within a budget that with numbers that were provided. And I think what would be more glaring is when the funds and the expenditures exceed the available dollars, it becomes extremely glaring. So our expectations are, just as the ministry has allocated, to work within that budget. We know that there is a lot of uncertainty around the PPE component in particular. And I've identified that as one of our primary concerns, and it does depend on the model that does get rolled out. But it will be tracked. Every nickel of our COVID expenditures are being tracked currently and will continue to be tracked in the fall. And those reports will be brought forward to the board, which I think then makes it extremely obvious to our public and to the province that this is the gap in terms of the funding that is required under a COVID environment that was not provided. So that's just in terms of your specific question, Trustee Crawford, I don't believe we have a choice. A budget has to go forward at some point, and whether or not it's passed by the board or the province decides to enter the field, I think that's really probably what could occur.
Thank you, Trustee Templeton.
Yeah, I actually agree with a lot that's been said here. Everybody's kind of everybody's taking little pieces of everything that I was afraid of and putting it together. I'm in favor of, I was in favor of not passing until Carla just spoke, because when we're going after and continuing to hound, I believe that we will end up with getting what we need for our board. So I'd like to thank staff for the great work that they've done. And again, I will be supporting the budget.
Thank you. Trustee Forbes.
Thank you. And I'm just going to quickly jump in as well to the motion. So given the numbers that we've been given from the ministry, and balancing those expenditures is obviously a legal requirement. So I'm very grateful to staff for that they've done that. And I just wanted to share that I share everyone's concerns as well. I have a child going into grade 12, her final graduating year next year. Tons of uncertainty for our staff and our students, and how we're going to pay for it in terms of PPE and all the various unknowns that we've all referenced here. So I do believe that the budget, given the numbers that we've been given, is the best that we can do at this time. But the advocacy role of writing a letter, as Trustee Edwards has outlined, is vital. And that And as Interim Associate Director Kisco has mentioned, making sure that we publicly report on all of our COVID expenditures and realizing that this is way beyond, this is a public health crisis, and this goes way beyond an education budget issue. This is public health, and there must be some recognition of that from the government. And I am so thankful that we as a Board of Trustees see this and are willing to pull together to advocate for that on behalf of our students, our families, and our staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Forbes. So seeing no further commentary, I'd just like to thank you and staff. I think everybody's point certainly has a huge merit with what we've been dealing with this year. And like I say, this has not been a normal year by far, but I do believe we've got a good team around the table to meet the challenges that we may have moving forward, such as advocacy letters, which we'll discuss. But at this time, you've moved the budget. Trustee Forbes, Trustee Barnes has seconded that. Could everyone use your panel so I can see? So we're now going to a vote on our budget. If you could use that so I can see who's in favor and who's against. One, two. I don't think everyone's signified. Let's see here. Okay, 1, 2. Okay, the budget passes. So so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in favor and 2 opposed.
In favor, 2 no.
2 no. Perfect. Thank you, John. So that carries. So thank you, everyone. And this part of it, let's go to Donna's motion of the letter. If I could suggest, I think we're probably all in favor of that. We're going to need a seconder, but probably the easiest thing to do is pass that a letter. Let's draft it. We'll send it to trustees. Let's not do the wordsmithing on this during this meeting. I think we all have a pretty good idea of what we want to have in there, but that would be my suggestion. So on the letter of sending it to the government that Donna, Trustee Edwards had suggested, do we have a seconder for that?
I'll second that, Chris.
Trustee Forbes, and I see your hand up, Trustee Crawford. Go ahead.
That was just for seconding.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Crawford. So we have Trustee Edwards moved, Trustee Forbes seconded. Any discussion to that letter at all, or can we just leave it? We'll draft it. We'll send it out to trustees before it's sent out to make sure it captures everybody's intent. Okay, seeing no comments, could we have someone all in favor with sending the letter? Is there anyone opposed at all? Okay, seeing none, that carries. So that's what we will do. We'll send that out to, we'll have a letter drafted. We'll send that out amongst the trustees. And if there's any wordsmithing or any changes that need to be done at that time, we'll do that then before we send it out. On that note, could I have someone move the adjournment? Trustee Crawford, we have a seconder for that. Let's see here. Trustee Noble, perfect. All in favor? Thank you, everyone. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Oh.